It's the most notorious racist murder in British history. Tonight, we reveal the key lead in the Stephen Lawrence case was disastrously mishandled by police.
They had no intention of finding the people who killed my son.
We identify a suspect who's never been named publicly before.
What you have found out makes him pivotal to the entire enterprise.
Our investigation places him at the centre of the case.
Well, you know, I mean, short of a signed confession, I don't know what else you want, really.
And asks if police failures let the suspects slip away. Neil, from the BBC, did you attack Stephen Lawrence? Were you there when Stephen Lawrence was attacked? Did you stab Stephen Lawrence? On this street, in April 1993, a racist murder took place that has haunted Britain ever since. 18-year-old Stephen Lawrence was stabbed to death in Eltham, South London, while waiting for a bus with his friend.
Steve was a human being, let's put it that way, simple. He cared about people. No matter what you look like, no matter who you are, he showed you respect. He was a genuine person.
They looked fun, happy, peaceful. So I felt really safe with the both of them at the bus stop. They were doing dance steps on the pavement and on the road.
Stephen and his friend Dwayne Brooks moved away to watch for their bus.
At that point, Mr. Dwayne Brooks says that he saw a group of lads across the other side of the road. Then he basically said to Stephen something along the lines of, "Come on, Stephen."
As if in response, one of the gang shouted what, and a racist slur. He then led the group across the road towards Stephen and Dwayne.
I just see the movements and Stephen on the floor and Dwayne running past and stopped at my level in front of me and turn around and shout, "Run, Steve, run."
Stephen had been stabbed twice. He ran over 200 metres but collapsed and died. When the Metropolitan Police stopped looking into Stephen's murder 3 years ago, I decided to investigate myself. I've traced witnesses, seen police files, and uncovered new evidence. After the murder in 1993, the names of 5 violent local teenagers kept coming up. They became the prime suspects. Gary Dobson, David Norris, Luke Knight, and brothers Neil and Jamie Acourt. Stephen's friend Dwayne Brooks survived. He told police there were 6 attackers. He said the lead attacker's hair was bushy, light brown and stuck out. Eyewitnesses at the bus stop also described a man with wavy and frizzy hair. The 5 prime suspects looked different, but police didn't focus on identifying the fair-haired lead attacker. How many attackers were there?
I've always felt 6. And the reason I felt there was 6 is originally that's what Mr. Brooks said, 6.
We believe at least 6 white youths.
He said word on the street is at least 6 people were involved.
We've always said there were 6 people there.
Police secretly filmed some of the prime suspects.
shots. I don't think it's really a second for Spurs, but what do you make of it?
Despite several investigations and a private prosecution, no one was convicted.
This will see. Let there be justice for our son.
Do you have any statement about the Lawrence family?
I don't think what happened today is fair at all.
What do we want it? Now! What do we want?
A landmark public inquiry led by Sir William Macpherson found the Met to be institutionally racist. It also criticised the Met's failure to investigate the unidentified fair-haired attacker. There was outrage at the behaviour of the 5 prime suspects when they appeared at the inquiry. In 2006, Clive Driscoll took on the case. He achieved a forensic breakthrough and 2 murder convictions. David Norris and Gary Dobson were jailed in 2012. Clive Driscoll then went after the other killers by going through all the evidence from the start.
With all historical investigations, you revisit your information in the light of events.
One of those he investigated was this man, Matthew White, known publicly as Witness K. Less than 2 weeks into the first investigation in 1993, officers heard White had visited the home of suspects Neil and Jamie Acortt on the night of the murder.
Well, look, there's been a stabbing down Wellow.
This meeting even appeared in a television reconstruction of the case. White was spoken to. His statement said he had briefly seen the Acorts and Gary Dobson and told them about the attack. The statement also included an alibi for the evening. But it should have been clear he had a bigger role in the case. Some local youths who named the prime suspects got information from Matthew White. One of the youths walked into a police station the day after the murder. He said David Norris and Neil Acortt stabbed Stephen and that a blonde kid was involved, potentially the fair-haired attacker mentioned by eyewitnesses. The informant was given the alias James Grant. When Kent police later investigated the Met's handling of the case, they warned that whoever James Grant's source was, he knew so much so quickly he could have been present during the murder.
I think the whole way that James Grant was actually dealt with has always been concerned. It should have been, where did you get your information from? How do you know? That would have shaped the police investigation.
James Grant told Kent police his source was Matthew White, and he told the Met this fact from the start. I've discovered Kent police then formally told the Met to get to the bottom of how White knew so much and what his role in the case really was. He'd been mentioned several times in the Met's original operation, including in a note in the investigation's database seen by Clive Driscoll 20 years later. I've obtained that note, which contained a vital lead buried by the Met. It said a detective knew Matthew White's stepfather, who was saying his stepson wasn't telling police all he knew. But the note contained wrong information. It named his other stepfather. White had 2. Later inquiries were sent to the wrong one. Clive Driscoll persisted and found the right stepfather in 2013, 2 decades after he first approached police.
I knocked on his door and said, I'm Detective Chief Inspector Clive Driscoll. I've come to talk to you about Stephen Lawrence murder. To which he said, you're rushing this job, aren't you, officer? He actually said that to me.
The stepfather, Jack Severs, was interviewed and gave a statement. He said his stepson admitted being there when Stephen was murdered. He said White told him Stephen deserved it. Jack Severs said White didn't name the others present, but he inferred they were the prime suspects.
And what was his demeanour? Did he appear worried? It didn't seem to bother him?
Not bothered.
No?
No.
He's just told you about it. Did he have any emotion at all?
No. Like it were an everyday occurrence.
Right. Okay.
But that was the people he were knocking about with at the time.
So what he has basically said to you is...
He knew who done it.
So he said it was there at the time?
He was actually there at the time.
He saw it?
He saw it.
How did it take 2 decades for the Met to speak to White's stepfather? The detective he approached in 1993 was a friend from the Freemasons. I traced the now retired detective. He told me Jack Severs had a relative who saw the attack. The detective confirmed he passed information to the murder investigation. I've discovered the information was received by the man in charge, Brian Whedon.
We've made many inquiries, and they've all been conducted with diligence and conscientiousness by a hard-working, conscientious team.
Whedon's own notebook says a meeting was planned between police, Matthew White and his stepfather. White never showed up. It was 20 years before anyone followed up the lead. A lawyer for Brian Whedon told me he won't comment on our evidence.
They had no intention of finding the people who killed my son. I've got no confidence in these people to do anything when it comes on to this case. Absolutely no confidence at all.
Sir William Macpherson's inquiry in 1998 examined how White, known as Witness K at the hearings, was handled. Police gave the inquiry the note naming the wrong stepfather.
I found that absolutely shocking, staggering, that wrong information would be fed to the inquiry. Had the police did what Kent police asked them, the murder would have been resolved in 1999.
In response to our investigation, the Met said the original handling of the approach by Matthew White's stepfather was a significant and regrettable error. By 2000, a Met operation was tasked with finally checking all leads on Matthew White, as Kent police recommended years earlier. But it again failed to do so. I've discovered that in 2000, detectives spoke to a separate witness who we're calling Witness Purple. He independently said Matthew White had confessed to being present during the attack and also to taking part in it. He stated White spoke to him after the murder and said, "We've done some black kids up the road." Witness Purple said White described himself as playing a leading role in the attack.
Matty had shouted something out to them. They'd shouted something back. Matty run over to them, give him a dig or something, and everyone else run over there and piled in. Matty went to put the boot in, and then the others done him up like a kipper.
This account effectively mirrored the description of the lead attacker given by Stephen's friend, Dwayne Brooks. Witness Purple said White named the others present, the 5 prime suspects.
Dave and Neil started getting silly with a knife, stabbing and cutting him.
David Norris and Neil Acortt were the same pair named by the informant James Grant as those who stabbed Stephen. Witness Purple described Matthew White later saying of himself that he was the lucky one, he started it, his name was never mentioned. Witness Purple said White admitted disposing of evidence and that his visit to the Acortt home that night was to warn them Stephen was dead. Police could have had 2 witnesses saying White admitted being present during the murder. But they didn't find the right stepfather. Instead, they simply arrested White, who denied being involved, and read Witness Purple's statements to him. This created a risk for Witness Purple.
People often said to me there was a wall of silence. There was never a wall of silence. There was a wall of fear though. And so if you were going to alert everybody that this bloke was talked to the old Bill, you are effectively alerting the bad guys, and that cannot be good police work.
Many witnesses feared the prime suspects and their families. David Norris's father was a gangster, known for bribing and intimidating witnesses and having close contact with some police. The spectre of corruption has been ever present. Even the officer who dealt with both Matthew White and the informant James Grant in 1993 has been described by the Met as corrupt. But John Davidson was cleared of being corrupt in Stephen's case. Could Matthew White have been the fair-haired attacker? Two people said he admitted being present during the attack. But what about his alibi? Prior to being arrested, White gave statements to police. I've examined his accounts. He claimed he heard about the stabbing when he was in a nearby house, but that was untrue. In fact, it was Matthew White who told people there about the stabbing. White claimed to have been with a friend that night, a potential alibi witness. But others saw White alone in the minutes after the murder. The attack happened here at about 10:40 p.m. He was seen in this nearby area just over 10 minutes later. One witness spoke to White in that area and said he knew about an incident. Sisters Louise and Kelly Kavanagh saw him here, outside their then home. The encounter was crucial to White's story. Matthew White told police he heard about the stabbing from Louise, who'd just been driven past the crime scene by her sister Kelly, and Louise said she did tell White outside her house. The story was accepted by police and featured in this reconstruction. But I found it didn't happen. I've spoken to Kelly. She says her sister Louise wasn't in the car that night, so couldn't have known about the attack. Kelly says that as she pulled up here outside their then home, she saw Matthew White at the gate with her sister. White looked breathless and then ran off. Louise then said a black boy had been stabbed up the road. When Kelly asked Louise how she already knew, Louise said Matthew White had told her. Louise Kavanagh is dead. We may never know why she gave a false account about White. Her sister Kelly says to protect Louise, she hasn't said what really happened until now. So White's alibi was false, as was how he claimed to know about the stabbing.
I'm shocked that you were not in a police force is able to do so much from the time you took over and start looking into this case. These are things that the police force should have been finding and trying to use to try and solve this case.
During the first investigation, senior officers knew to watch for a fair-haired suspect as seen by eyewitnesses. But the description wasn't shared with the full team. I've obtained surveillance images taken in Eltham by the investigation in the days after the murder. They show Matthew White. He had bushy, light brown hair, like the attacker described by Stephen's friend Dwayne Brooks, and like the suspect police knew to watch for. White also looked like efits and artist impressions by eyewitnesses at the bus stop. They weren't given the chance to see him in a police lineup.
He could have been on the identification parade, and I'm absolutely convinced Dwayne Brooks would have picked him up. What you have found out makes him pivotal to the entire enterprise.
When David Norris and Gary Dobson were jailed in 2012, the judge said police should go after the other killers. Clive Driscoll kept investigating, but he was made to retire in 2014, soon after arresting Matthew White as a suspect.
When Clive left, that was it. I said to myself, there's no way this case is going to be solved because there's nobody in this force who wants to solve this case. There would be no persons in prison if it wasn't for Clive.
White's appearance changed over the years. He was often in trouble with the police. I learned he was convicted in 2020 of an assault in a shop on the same street where Stephen was murdered. I traced the victim, who said White, a shoplifter, became violent after being challenged.
While he was shouting, there was like spit flying from his mouth, and he was like, "Remember you're in Eltham. Remember where you are. Remember what happened to Stephen Lawrence. I can call my boys. They can come down and they can deal with you."
Do you remember how many times he referenced Stephen Lawrence?
He said it like in almost every threat. He referenced it at least 8, 9 times. You know, like you see what happened to Stephen Lawrence. You see what can happen here. Like, know where you are. Like, know where you are. And then he did reference that it happened close by. He said it happened at the bus stop right there.
In 2020, Scotland Yard stopped investigating Stephen's murder.
We've come to the view right now that there are no viable lines of inquiry. We've convicted, as you know, 2 people in 2012, but there are still people free.
Matthew White, who could have helped solve the case, died a year later in this bedsit. A heroin user, his body wasn't found for days. An inquest recorded an open conclusion. Our evidence places Matthew White at the centre of the Stephen Lawrence case. Was he a witness or a suspect?
Well, based on the evidence, based on what we now know, you would have to consider Matthew White as the fair-haired attacker. There was someone who's known to be in the area, someone whose alibi is now gone, someone whose artist impression looks very similar. The descriptions given by the people at the bus stop would fit that person. There are others that say that things were said by him. Well, you know, I mean, short of a signed confession, I don't know what else you'd want, really.
The Met's investigative failures mean Matthew White's full role in Stephen's case might never be proven. Scotland Yard told us there are suspects who haven't been brought to justice for Stephen's murder. The force said Matthew White was arrested and interviewed in 2000 and in 2013, and a file submitted to prosecutors in 2005 and in 2014. On both occasions, the Crown Prosecution Service advised there was no realistic prospect of conviction. Deputy Assistant Commissioner Matt Ward told us,
"The impact of the racist murder of Stephen Lawrence and subsequent inquiries continues to be felt throughout policing. Unfortunately, too many mistakes were made in the initial investigation, and the impact of them continues to be seen. On the 30th anniversary of Stephen's murder, Commissioner Sir Mark Rowley apologised for our failings, and I repeat that apology today."
2 of the prime suspects are the Acorn brothers. They're both still free, but the evidence relating to Matthew White implicates them in Stephen's murder. I wanted to question Neil Acorn. Neil, from the BBC. Why did Matthew White say you attacked Stephen Lawrence? Why did Matthew White say he saw you attack Stephen Lawrence?
Go away, please.
Why would Matthew say that?
Go away, please.
And Jamie Acorn. Did you attack Stephen Lawrence? Were you part of the group that attacked Stephen Lawrence? Matthew White said you actually stabbed Stephen Lawrence. Did you stab Stephen Lawrence? You attacked Stephen Lawrence. Were you there when Stephen Lawrence was attacked? Why would people say you were there when Stephen Lawrence was attacked? You got no comment at all? Matthew White said he saw you attack Stephen Lawrence. Did he lead you across the road that night? Neil Acorn fleeing rather than answering questions. Absolutely no comment at all. It's 30 years since Stephen Lawrence was killed and he's still out and he's still not answering questions. How could there be so many failings in one case?
Institutional racism is so insidious, it actually affects everything. When you go into a room and people have been smoking in there, you do not see anybody smoking, but you know smoking has taken place. That's what institutional racism is. You know it's around. There was an unbelievable carelessness, unbelievable unconcern to resolve the murder.
And the lack of concern is because of Stephen's race?
Oh yes, oh yes, oh yes. There is no other way of actually describing this.
Our evidence shows that despite decades of investigation, much was left undone.
I think for the Metropolitan Police's own dignity and for its own sanity, if they could complete the investigation. There are many murders where we haven't been successful. Stephen's almost become the name that's mentioned for all of them.
I wouldn't want the Metropolitan Police to deal with it. They must be able to find a decent police force in this country who could do the case. And even if they fail, I would feel better if somebody else did it, and instead of giving it to the Metropolitan Police again.
30 years on, will there ever be full justice for Stephen Lawrence?
I can't see why somebody would kill my son, because this boy was such a gentle and human being. There was more than 2 people who was at the scene and the night that they murdered my son. All of them should be in prison doing time.